productive
And then we stayed
to the city in my appointed role.
It was great. We're gonna.
Somewhere in there.
We decided we already got a room. We decided to kind of stay in this town this year.
Somebody wrote on that. Did they write on yours?
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday edition.
Yes.
Feels like Wednesday.
Is it really? Oh, that's a sacrifice. That's good.
So you're saving your money.
I'm going to pass the attendance sheet around, if you would, please. Just a couple of things before we get started. There are, on this table over here, there are, looks like 6 packets from last week. If you weren't here, there's a packet with your name on it over there. There's also a couple from the 3rd and a couple of extras from the 10th, if for some reason you don't have yours. I also, if we could go very quickly, I want to point out a couple of things in the yellow packet. We've got the table of contents, which is adjusted every time we add things. The agenda for this evening, the minutes, which we'll get to in just a moment. The meeting schedule revised. If you take a look at that, the Citizen Satisfaction Survey will be available next week, so we slotted that in so you could get it as quickly as possible. And then just moved economic development to the following week of March 3rd. So on February 24th, we will include the Citizen Satisfaction Survey, unless you'd rather do it elsewise, but I think there was a real interest in getting that when you could get it. We're also going to add on the evening of the 3rd, the City Manager's office, because tonight the presentation is not about the office and the budget. It's about those larger questions that deal with finance in many ways, but that are also structural. So we'll just put that in on the 3rd. And if you have any questions about that, let me know. Are you okay with the Citizen Satisfaction Survey next week?
Sure.
Okay. And then we've posted everything with posts up to and on the 16th. Now, I've gotten one inquiry about opening the hyperlink, the attachments. Is anyone else having trouble opening attachments? I know you were the one I heard from.
All of the, like if you go on any of the answers to the questions,
Right.
and so forth, and it looks like a hot link, when
Right.
you go to click on it.
We're having a lot of trouble figuring out why that doesn't work in your situation. Don't know. It could be cache drive. So we maybe need to talk, because I don't have any others that are having difficulty opening them.
Has anybody tried?
Has anyone tried to open them?
And you got them open where it says like
Kind of the blue lettering, right?
the blue lettering on it. I mean, I've got the questions, but when you go to this
Any link that's been in anything posted.
And we're checking those.
question list,
We're checking those multiple times to make sure they work even when they're updated, so there isn't something that's thrown off. So maybe we could chat and we'll see. But that's the only one I've got so far.
I had an issue last week, but
Okay. I think last week we had some trouble with the loading. We had a few of them that didn't work with the loading, but that's corrected. So if you've got a couple minutes after, Joan.
sure.
Okay. Now, I also would let you know that tonight is very thorough. It gets into the question of the CAFR versus the budget in a lot of detail, so that you'll get the kind of detail you want. I really encourage you to ask the questions to make sure that's clear. So if I could call the meeting to order. And we have the roll call going around. We will have 16 minutes of public comment. I haven't seen any cards yet, but is anybody here from the public that wants their 2 minutes, has filled out a card, or hasn't yet filled out a card? Anyone? I don't see any hands, so we'll just move on. We have, are there any questions from the last meeting that haven't been addressed? And I know I received some, Joan, from you on Sunday evening. Those are not yet posted, so they will be. But is there anyone that has anything from last week that you would like to bring up? Yes, sir.
Just one point for this week. I can't remember, but do we need a quorum in order to conduct business for tonight?
We have a
Oh,
quorum.
we do, okay.
The quorum is a majority of the members present.
So we're okay there. So can we get someone to move the approval of the minutes, which are attached to your materials?
I move.
We have a motion. Second. Any discussion?
When we were going through the ideas for possible revenue,
Yes.
series of questions that were asked as we were going through.
Yes.
Questions asked and answered someplace.
Did you hear the question? The question was there were a series of questions asked as we were going through the generation of ideas. That, are those questions? This wouldn't be the analysis of the idea. This was the questions that came up during that process. Are those going to be answered? Do we have a record of those? Okay.
We have the ideas that were generated.
I think there were some questions asked within the process of
Got 'em.
generating.
We have 'em.
So yes, they will be answered, and we do have those.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to the city manager and, again, encourage your questions and note-taking on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Yes.
Yes. Excuse me, did we?
Yeah, you did.
Actually went through and said aye.
Yes.
I want to make sure. I thought so. I want to make sure.
Thank you. This evening, we're going to go into some depth on the different budgets, 2006, 2009. And I apologize, Larry's going to go into extreme detail with you. And I apologize for that because the questions that have been asked, and unfortunately Howard isn't here tonight, hopefully he'll watch this on videotape, but Larry is prepared to, in great detail, explain why the CAFR is different than the budget and why the staff doesn't use the CAFR, but we use the budget from our budgeting purposes. And that information is extremely detailed and in-depth, and we apologize for that in advance, but we'll get Larry up here in a moment to start going over that. Tonight we're going to speak about the form of government a little bit, budget priorities, comparing public and private sector budgets, the difference between the budget document and the CAFR, the review of the fiscal year 10 general fund budget, a summary of the fiscal year 2006 to 2009 actuals, which there's been a great deal of focus on, and a review of the budget process and the decision-making processes. The form of government that we follow here in Goodyear is basically referred to as the council manager form of government. This form of government, I used to work for the International City Management Association longer ago than I like to admit, about 1970 and 71. And one of my jobs was to handle recognitions of cities that are eligible for council manager government and keep track of the cities in the country that are. I think it's worth just quickly reviewing those statistics. We contacted ICMA today and got statistics that in the 10,000 to 25,000 population range, 53% of the cities, or 966 of the 1,828, are council manager. In the 20 to 50,000 population, 63% of the cities, or 497 of the 787 cities, are council manager. In the 50,000, this is where we fall, in the 50,000 to 99,999 population, 64% of all cities operate under the council manager form of government, and that's 266 of 413 cities. In the 100,000 to 250,000 range, 65% of the cities are council manager cities, 117 of the 179 cities. In the 250 to the 500,000, that starts going back down. 47% of the cities are council manager cities, 17 of the 36. In the 500,000 to a million, 30% of the cities, or 7 of the 23, are council manager cities, and over 1 million, you have a third of the cities are council manager cities. That's 3 out of 9. Under council manager government, you elect a city council, the mayor and 6 city council members in our particular case. They're all equal. The mayor has a vote just like the council members, and that's basically the difference between mayor and council members. So the council members have the vote, and they provide the direction to the city manager, who administers the policies that they have adopted. This provides a good check and balance in the scheme of things because there's a professional administrator. Theoretically, the council hires a professional manager. I've been a city manager for 37 years. I've got a master's degree in city management from the University of Kansas, which is one of the prestigious schools of city management in the United States. And as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 37 years. You don't know who is going to get elected to a city council, and so that's why you have a city manager in there to provide the professional administration with the changes in city councils, the changes in policies and things like that. So it maintains a continuity and stability in the management of a city as political officials come and go. All city managers, by the way, belong to the International City Management Association, and we all are subject to a severe code of ethics. ICMA is known for one of the most severe code of ethics in the country of any professional organization, and it's an extreme code of ethics that we must follow religiously, or we can get reported by any other member or a member of the public, or they can read a newspaper article and then they will start an investigation. Setting budget priorities. There's major factors in establishing a budget. Setting budget priorities is a legislative function. That is, it's the city council's responsibility to set the priorities. As I mentioned, the mayor and the council are all equal. They all have one vote. Budget and goals and priorities are set by the council, and they're based upon community needs. You know, for example, adding senior services, which we have faced in recent years, adding after-school programs, keeping service levels high, as high as possible, maintaining low crime levels. These are all policies or priorities that the city council establishes. We also look at government needs, such as building a city center or attracting universities. This is something that the council has determined is an extremely high priority for this community, and so we spend a lot of time and money in doing that. Financial resources. We have to try to repay, we have to repay all of our bonds within 20 years, and we borrow at the lowest levels possible. And sustainability, we make sure that we can weather more low budget years with the budget balances that we make in each year. So we constantly are striving to be ahead of the game when it comes to budgeting. Implementing the budget is an administrative matter, and that's the city manager and his or her staff. Political budget goals and priorities are carried out by us, and we, under the direction of the city manager, we always very conservatively forecast revenues and available revenues so that we never go over, or hopefully don't go over. Balanced personnel, services, and programs to meet available revenues. We make sure all priority revenues are legally allocated to the correct funds. We allocate new operating costs associated with new capital projects. We allocate remaining resources to various funds to best meet customer needs. And we use ongoing funds whenever possible to cover ongoing costs. And this is very fundamental and something that we haven't done consistently in the last few years. As we've experienced these tremendous budget challenges, we sometimes use one-time funds to fund things, but the trouble with one-time funds is it's one time and they aren't there again. Let's spend a moment on this. This chart I showed you the first night, but now that you've been looking at municipal budgets for a couple of weeks, I thought it was worth looking at again. And I'll go through it this time in some specificity. Strategic goals, you have competitiveness in the private sector. In the public sector, you have mission effectiveness. And under financial goals, private sector, you'll have profit, growth, market share. In the municipal side, you'll have balanced budget, efficiencies. We aren't the federal government, we don't get to print money. Values, innovation, creativity, goodwill, brand recognition for the private sector. In the public sector, we have accountability to the public, integrity, fairness, and innovation. The private sector under desired outcomes, customer satisfaction. This is one place we both share a common goal. Under the public sector, we have customer satisfaction. Stakeholders. In the private sector, you have the stockholders, the owners, and the users. Under the public sector, you have the residents and the businesses, or defined in a different term, voters. Budget is defined by customer market demand for the private sector. Under the public sector, you have leadership goals and customer needs. The decision-making in the private sector is a private process, and you can't get in unless they let you in. Under the public sector, you have it's a very public process, usually played out in the media. And the key success factors for the private sector are growth rate, earnings, market share, uniqueness, advanced technology, and in the public sector, you're looking at best management practices, economies of scale, commonalities with other cities, and standardized technology. Other differences between the public and the private sector are that in the private sector, if a product is underperforming, they can just cut their losses and get out of it, or not if they choose to. In government, if a service is not performing and there's a political will to continue it, you're going to have to continue it. You can really see this being played out right now in the city of Phoenix. City of Phoenix is trying to cut $240 million. So they first passed a 2% tax on groceries a week or two ago. And so now they're down to $80 million that they have to cut. And so the city manager has submitted a budget that cuts, and cuts. So now you have budget hearings going on around the community, and you have the people who use community centers saying cut more police officers and firefighters because our community center is more important. You have people, of course, in the police and the fire supporters saying the cut of 144 police officers is way too significant. Cut the rest of the parks and recreation, community centers, and so forth. Those are the tough choices, and those are the tough types of choices and debates that go on in the public sector. So if a city has a service that is underperforming and there is a political will, then we keep that program. We also have had our population increase since 2006, a full 26%, which is remarkable. Our population since 2000 has increased 219%. That's remarkable. There are very few cities in this country that have ever increased that percentage, even over the life of their city. Government choices include basically raising revenues or cutting services. Again, recognizing that we cannot deficit finance. So we have to raise revenues or cut services. And that's quite frankly why we need this committee so desperately, because we need your advice on what priorities we should be looking at. This now gets into the difference between the budget book. Larry?
I think another important difference between private and public, that in the private sector, that enterprise is generally relying upon its ability to market its goods and services. In the public sector, like the city budget, especially in Arizona, you can be perfect in everything you can control, but you get a large share of your revenues from the states, and if that doesn't come, that's going to hurt you also. So no matter how well you do, because you're dependent upon those revenues, and I think that's a big difference between, in Arizona anyway, private and public.
Thank you. That's a really good point. In the budget book, we have 80 funds. Just think about that for a second, for those of you in the private sector. 80 funds. We collect revenues in each of those 80 funds, and they all go into the right fund, and we're audited for all of this. Those funds then, you follow the arrows down, all come to the actual expenditures that we do in the budget book. And there is no real comparisons between them, although we have to keep them separate. The budget book then goes down to the CAFR, which is our audited expenditures across all funds on a combined basis. And that's when I'm going to ask Larry to share with you. And as I said, I apologize for the technical detail that he has to go into, but Larry has promised that he'll make this as interesting as possible. Larry?
Thank you, John, and I really do appreciate that introduction into what it is that we do, I guess, in the finance department. Actually, I find this stuff kind of exciting. So we've got a quorum of one person that's going to enjoy what I talk about tonight, and actually several staff in the back, for at least their portions of it, are going to enjoy this. What I'm going to do in this discussion is give you an overview of information that you have. By the way, I forgot to ask my staff if they'll start passing. We've got some more handouts for you because I didn't think you had enough reading material. It's actually what we're going to show you tonight, so you can put a hand on any schedule, well, most of the schedules that I'm going to show you. And we're going to go through a couple of budget schedules and show you what that information contains. We're going to go through a few of the schedules in the CAFR and show you what that information contains. And then we're going to also, as part of this, try to answer some of the questions that we've been asked along the way as to what this information has been and where it's going. So the very first schedule I'm going to talk about, I also want to apologize to those of you. I'm going to be putting this up on Ymca, which is our projector. It's an overhead projector. It is behind me. So for parts of my presentation, you get to see the back of my bald head. I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but if you have questions and I'm not looking at you, someone at least get my attention to let me know. So if I can have Elmo, please. This is the first schedule that you were handed out, or in order of the schedules that we gave you. And what this schedule shows you is, in each of the columns, it takes the revenues, I guess I got to look at it here, takes the revenues for 2007 and 2008, and those are actual revenues that have been calculated. Takes the budget for 2000, I'm good, Dick, good idea, I got one. Takes the budget for 2009. That was the original estimate that the budget document was adopted on, and it gives you the 2009 actual. Then the final column is the 2010 budget. This is a schedule of revenues. This schedule exists in your existing budget book starting on page 220. We have made, you notice at the bottom right-hand corner, it shows that it has been updated just today, I think it shows, February 16th. That we have updated to put actual numbers in there for 2009 and to make sure that it's consistent between the years. So this is a more current edition of what's on starts on page 220 of your budget book. The next schedule we'll talk about briefly is Schedule 3, which is the operating funds. This schedule also appears starting on page 226 of your budget book. What we're showing is 2006 actual, 2007 actual, 2008 actual, 2009 actual, and then the 2010 budget. This schedule has been modified basically to reflect a few of the issues that have come up in this discussion. One of the concerns that's been mentioned is we can't get our hands around what those ongoing costs are, what the operating expenditures are, because they appear to be commingled with one-time and capital costs. The schedule on the revised one that the update that we handed out to you today only includes ongoing costs for each department. So there are differences for that. Also, for 2009, we adjusted this schedule to reflect the actual numbers that come from the audited financial statements. 2010, of course, wouldn't change on either of these schedules other than we had to make some adjustments to answer another question that we had, and I'll give you a couple of examples of it. As you recall, when I was discussing the finance department, I talked about a couple of activities that were taking place in the finance department that had been taking place in other departments. One of those is shown right here on the front page, mail services. That is the mail room, and you'll see that that is part of the city clerk budget for 2006, 2007, and 2008. So those numbers are reflected in the city clerk's budget, and these are the actual expenditures. That's where they were accounted for in that year. If you go to the next page, to page 227, you'll see that the mail services are shown in 2009 and 2010 in the finance department. And that is a way to provide you, it's a modification we made to provide you with the historical data. What happened in the book there is if a department went away and didn't exist today, and that example happens in community services, it may not show up in this budget book in a year it doesn't exist. We're giving it to you so you have that comparative history. There's a question here, yes.
Larry, the fiscal year 2009 actuals, are they actual up through 216, or does that reflect the previous date?
The 2009 actuals are actually up through June 30th of 2009, the audited numbers in that column. The date that we're giving you there is the date that we revised it. When this schedule is prepared for the budget book that you have, we haven't even completed the fiscal year, so there's a lot of estimates that are made as to what those numbers will look like. For your purposes, we thought it better, and from your questions, trying to give you that actual data so you can look at what was spent historically. Okay? Now I'm going to talk about a few schedules that are in the comprehensive annual financial report. And I do admit that this can get a little dry at times for those of you that do not aspire to be a CPA, but if you'll bear with me for a couple of schedules, I'll go through this with you. The first schedule that I'm looking at is on page 17 of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Your copy that was just passed out to you, that is the thick part of what we just passed out to you. It's stapled in one group. The pages don't start with numbers, they start with Roman numerals, and when you get to the actual numbers, go to page 17, and that is the schedule that I have up on the screen. The question was asked actually last week about seeing a balance sheet for the city of Goodyear. In a business environment, This is a balance sheet in the city of Goodyear, and it's called the Statement of Net Assets. What this statement shows, and this statement is very unique in governmental accounting because our day-to-day accounting records have to be adjusted at the end of the year to reflect this statement. But this statement shows a few things that we don't normally worry too much about in our accounting system. Capital assets, you've got land and construction in progress, and you've got other capital assets. Those are your depreciable assets. They include, in government, they include streets. Now, those are not necessarily assets we're going to be selling. They are not necessarily assets that are liquid, but they are accounted for, and then for this purpose, there is a depreciation factor for them. So you'll see that the total assets for both governmental activities, which would include the general fund, the highway user, the streets funds, and those various funds, but does not include the enterprise funds. And then the next column is your business type activities. The total assets citywide are approximately $1.1 billion. This does, by the way, and this whole report includes the CFD debt and balances, and I'll be showing you a little bit of that. Yes, sir.
What are internal balances in your asset column?
The internal balances would be accounts due between funds. And yes, those basically are receivables from one fund to another. An example is, maybe many of you are familiar with this, when the ballpark was built, a certain portion around the ballpark was supposed to have some private sector investment for what we refer to as retail liners, some space for retail to be right there at the ballpark. The private partners of that particular transaction filed bankruptcy and were not able to pay for that, so the city had to pay for that. The general fund is showing that as $1 million loan to the ballpark in hopes of recovering that money at some point in the future when those retail liners are sold. So that would be a loan from one fund to another fund. Does that answer what you're looking for?
It answers $1 million of it.
Yes. And there are various other inter-fund transactions that would take place. The largest other one that I can think of, and it actually was larger, and I'm not sure why the number nets down to this, is that at the end of June 30th, we had done a number of capital projects in the water and sewer funds that were to be funded by a bond issue. However, with the city center project looking like it was imminent that we might be selling bonds, at that time we were thinking August or so, we held off on selling the water and sewer bonds to try to put that together and go out to the capital markets at one time. Well, obviously that hasn't happened yet. We have subsequently sold those bonds, but we had to loan some money from the general fund to the water and sewer fund as a temporary cash flow until that came back. That has been repaid.
Thank you.
Larry?
Yes, sir.
I may have missed it while I was reading and you were speaking, but can you explain the difference between governmental activities and business type activities?
I will try. Governmental activities is what we traditionally think of in the city. The general fund is the primary source of the governmental activities. However, also included in that number are the transactions, including the debt, related to the community facilities districts. It also includes all of the funds for impact fee funds that are set aside legally for impact fees, with the exception of those applying to the enterprise funds. Those impact fee funds are part of the business activities, And it's easier to define what's in the business activities, which is your water, wastewater, sanitation, and your ballpark.
So your enterprise funds, basically.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's the business type activities.
Thank you.
Now, in the bottom half of this schedule, you'll notice we have non-current liabilities that are due in more than 1 year, as well as within 1 year. The liabilities that are due in more than 1 year generally do not get reflected on the balance sheet for the governmental funds, but they are in this particular statement. And what that leaves us with is net assets, which would be comparable in the private sector to stockholders' equity. And the net assets for the city of Goodyear are $450 million for round numbers in the governmental funds, approximately $188 million in the enterprise funds, for a total of about $636 million. One thing I forgot in my introduction, my notes even had it in there, and I apologize for this. For those of you familiar with governmental accounting, you probably understand this a bit, but the format for the CAFR is regulated by national standards. Those standards are set out by the Governmental Accounting Standard Board. We refer to that as GASB. For those of you in the private sector, you've heard of FASB, which is the Financial Accounting Standards Board. Back in the early 1980s, those two standards got separated out because of the complexities involved unique to government compared to the private sector. The primary users of the CAFR that had the most input into the development of this report are bond analysts and rating agencies. And so it's developing a fairly complex structure. You're going to see there's two different accounting methods. These first 2 pages that I'm showing you, the accounting method is full accrual and includes some items that you would never see in, well, rarely see in a business environment. For example, in the chart that I have on the screen, you'll notice highways and streets, we're showing capital grants and contributions of $46 million for highways and streets. That number represents the value of infrastructure provided to us by developers. When a street is built, it is donated to the city within a development. We have to book that asset in this schedule. We also have to book the fair market of it coming in. The balancing entry is a contribution. So implicit on this schedule is that our street activities generated $40 million of profit this past year. Obviously, that isn't completely true, and none of it was a spendable resource. So I'm going to turn to the next page, which is page 20 and 21. These show the balance sheets for the governmental fund types on what we refer to as a modified accrual basis. And that is traditionally how governmental accounting has been done over the years, although the definition has changed over time. The difference in a modified accrual basis is that on the expenditure side, one of the things that is not included is a long-term liability for capital assets. It also does not include long-term debt. You can see it doesn't include the capital debt also. Governmental accounting, if you want to compare the revenue and expenditure statement to the private sector, it's far closer to your cash flow statements. It's showing where your resources are coming from and where they're going. And that's what the modified accrual does as we go through this when you see the revenues and expenditures. The schedules on pages 20 and 21 show the balance sheets. Make sure I got my pages right. Yep. Show the balance sheets for the major governmental funds. And major governmental funds are defined in the accounting standards. We do not have a lot of discretion over what is called a major governmental fund and what is a non-major governmental fund. But as you look at the various funds, I'll go through these columns with you a little bit, but I'm going to do it at a very high level here. The general fund, of course, is the general operating fund of the city of Goodyear, and that's what most of your discussions have been about. You see two columns in there that represent the community facilities districts. There's a debt service column and there's a capital project column. We do not include either of those columns in our budget as part of the process at all. We have a separate budget process for the community facilities districts. The community facilities districts are districts that issue debt to fund infrastructure that otherwise might be funded by a development. And the debt is serviced by the property owners within that district. If you look in the far right-hand corner of page 21, and I know the way yours are put together, it's going to be hard for you to see the column headings, but you see in the bottom right hand on page 21, this number of 71 million, that is total fund balance for all of those funds, all of the governmental fund types. So I want to give you a very brief overview of what makes that number up. $29 million of that is the general fund. $18 million of that are the CFDs, and approximately $24 million are the non-major governmental funds. The primary component of that are development impact fees. Development impact fees are legally restricted to how they can be used only for capital projects directly caused by growth, and they had to be included in a plan. They're highly regulated, and while they're at the discretion of the city council, they're only at the discretion of the city council consistent with the plan that was used to develop those fees. Pages 24 and 25 show what we would call the statements of revenues and expenditures. I'm not going to go through this in depth. This would be, as I indicated previously, would be the cash flow statement in a business environment, but yet it's kind of in an income statement format, and I think that's what really makes it difficult to read between government and the private sector. I wanted to point out in this, because it's come up several times, the question's been raised about the McDowell Road Commercial Corridor Improvement District. And you'll notice on there that this is showing an excess or a deficiency of revenues under expenditures of about $2.5 million for the year ending June 30th of 2009. That number represents the debt service payments that were made during that fiscal year, but those payments were actually funded by the bonds that were issued for that improvement district. It's what is called capitalized interest in the financing market. So it was interest for an 18-month period of time was sold as part of the bonds until the improvements were completed. There's a statutory requirement that is done that way on improvement district bonds. As a reminder of what improvement districts are, we talked about it a bit, but it probably was in an overview session. The McDowell Road Commercial Corridor Improvement District is the funding mechanism used to finance the infrastructure surrounding the proposed mall and the area in Australia Falls? Go ahead.
So basically, what you're saying is that when you sell bonds, you sell it for the face value of your projected facility needs plus several years' worth of interest. And this payment comes out of the interest.
That is correct. And the improvement district sells the bonds, pays for the improvements and the interest, as just mentioned. There is an assessment placed on all of the property that benefits from those improvements, which includes the property owned by Westcor, where the proposed mall will be. It includes the area south there where Red Lobster, Olive Garden are. It includes that area that has been built up where Bash's and some of those stores are. It includes basically all of that square. All of those properties were assessed for those improvements with a lien. That lien actually moves ahead of any other debt that may be on that property, other than a property tax lien. So all of the costs are paid for by those property owners through those assessments. The financing is tax exempt, which is one of the reasons that it is an advantage for the developers. It saves them a lot of money by financing it through tax exempt. The city would be contingently liable for those bonds in this case if the property owners defaulted. But if that happened, there would be a sale of their property to cover that debt service payment. So that is the collateral. The property itself is the collateral for these bonds. Yes, sir.
The $10.5 million transfer out of the general fund, is there a schedule that shows where that goes?
Yes, it's just whether or not it's in your book is the question. Let me ask you that or answer that. Because I'm not finding it quick, let's leave that as a question that we'll get an answer to you. But yes, there is. I can give you a very high level of it that about, because of the timing of the stadium, as I recall, about $6 million of the stadium debt service got hit in this fiscal year. We had 3 payments hit due to some timing things. Another $2 million for the operations, and then the bulk of the rest of it is for the what we refer to as the Highway User Revenue Fund, which is the streets area. But we can get you more detail if you need it more. Okay. On pages 24 and 25 again, I want to show you how the expenditures are grouped here. You'll notice in the expenditures that we're showing current expenditures, but the categories are general government, public safety, highways and streets, public works, culture and recreation. As you'll recall in our budget discussions, and this is Schedule 3 I'm just putting up, these are much more detailed. They're shown by department as opposed to by function, so it's at a considerably more detailed level that the budget book includes, and it further breaks it down into personnel services, contractual services, and commodities. In other words, these two report at completely different levels within there because they serve completely different people. I also, well, actually, I'm going to do this in order. I'm going to get back to, if you'll remember these schedules, we're going to get back to another table that's in the back of the book in a couple minutes. But before I do that, I want to go to pages 28 and 29. This schedule shows the budget, revenues, and expenditures in the general fund for 2009. You'll notice that the budget that was adopted included $76 million. The actual only came in at $62 million, leaving a variance of $14 million. The expenditures were originally estimated at $97 million. They came in at 66. Oh, sorry. I was pointing at it, though. It's not good enough, huh? That left a variance of about $31 million. I want to point out, of that $31 million, $20 million is what we have referred to as the council contingency that was not available for expenditures. So the net of those two is $11 million that was available, or that was saved in this past budget year. Starting on page 30 through 33, I'm not going to go through this in much depth, but these are the financial statements. To those of you in the private sector, these will look a lot more familiar. That is the combining balance sheets, income statements, and cash flow statements for the enterprise funds. Because of your discussions last week, or 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we're leaving that one alone unless someone wants to discuss it further. So next, what I want to do is ask you to turn to page 120. I'm dropping way back into the book. And this represents a 10-year history of what was actually spent in the governmental funds from 2009 all the way back to, I believe to 2000. The challenge in this number, as has been pointed out in a couple meetings ago, the challenge in this number is that this includes certain capital expenses and one-time, and it's hard to reconcile it back. So, and this is where it gets fun. We have a schedule that our accounting staff prepared. I'm going to show you just the top page, but everyone has a copy. This is the middle group. It looks like this. We included that in your packet today. What this schedule shows is actual expenditures by several functional categories. These three columns, personnel services, contractual services, and commodities, represent the same columns that we use, or the same categories that we use for budget purposes. These functions, we break them into the same categories that we use for budget purposes. The first three columns are the areas of high interest to you, and this schedule is where all of the details are calculated. If you go back to the final page, and this is just for so that you can actually see, and it's a little bit hard to read with the dark red there, but you'll notice the final number on page 3 of 2009 spreadsheet shows $132,630,417. And if you look in the bottom of page 20, total expenditures for that column, it is the exact same number. I showed this to a couple of staff earlier, and they thought that was magic, but it really isn't. It's hard work by some of our staff to make sure that all of these numbers reconcile so that you can see the history. So the summary of what I've said today is, first, I haven't put anyone to sleep, and I'm very proud of that. The second part is that, as John indicated earlier, for budget purposes, we often refer to the schedules that we've handed out tonight and included within the budget document. However, the schedules that we've included tonight and the schedules that we've shown you in the CAFR, I think, are useful tools for the questions that you've been asking. How do we see the history, and how do we use that moving forward? With that, unless someone has any other questions, I'll turn it back over. I see a couple of them here. Let's start here.
There, I do have one. We use the term contractual services and paint a lot of things with a very broad brush. We're talking about, at least according to the chart that you just were referring to, for 2009, we did $13 million worth of painting in contractual services. We use that brush analogy. In round numbers, et cetera, can you try to nail down what contractual services means?
I'll give the one real good answer that none of us has anything here. Yeah, it's elements and objects 2000 through 5999. It's very broad brush. As you'll recall, in our discussion, I mentioned that our expenditure categories throughout our general ledger contain about 6,500 different accounts. So there are a lot of accounts that make that up. I'm going to be honest with you when I tell you that as much as I would like to be able to tell you that category, by the way it's classified together, is all what we would traditionally think as contractual services. Because of the broad range of accounts, you're going to have things that you otherwise would not think to fall in that category. Very possibly things like dues and subscriptions or mail service or something like that could be included. So it's a very, very broad brush. And when you get into that versus the commodities, just because of the account classifications, basically these groupings were set up differently than the thought processes that were used to set up the specific charts of accounts. With that having been said, if you look, for example, on the bottom of page 1 there on the 2009 sheet, I'm only going to look at 2009. You have 4 years of it, but on the very bottom of 1, you see total human resources of just over $1 million. And in that, risk aversion is $850,000. I'm going to suggest, without having the details in front of me, that is where the liability, property and casualty premiums are paid. Okay, so that, while technically we're calling that a contractual service, that I could argue that to be a commodity just as easily as a contractual service.
Sounds like the short answer is there is no specific definition.
Correct. We can give you a long list of components, but
okay,
no simple answer.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
There's a question in the back, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
On the Schedule 3, it says operating funds expenditure schedule, but this is your definition of operating expenditures, not just operating funds. This is across the city, all of the operating expenditures by definition.
I think I want to limit it a little further in this schedule. While it says operating, I think operating meaning those 3 broad categories. What it does not include is the it does not include the reimbursements out of sales tax that we would pay, which are an ongoing type expenditure under development agreements. We've left that out of here for this purpose to allow comparability from year to year. But I would argue that's an ongoing expenditure. But yes, it would be the definition of operating.
Then the definition of operating expenditures does not include debt.
Does not include debt service for this purpose, again, even though it is ongoing. Absolutely, it's ongoing. But part of what I think, why we structured it this way, I mean, that's a very fair question. But I think the question that was asked before is you're seeing expenditures, and it's including so many things that get lumped together, and you wanted to see it separated out. What this schedule will do is show that. Now, if you look on the schedule that we handed out that looks like this, we have a column that shows the debt service.
So I can add up some of, in 09, page 3, I can add up some of the totals to get to the 73,611 in this 09 action.
That is correct. Question up here?
Yes. On the fiscal year 10 budget, this is all budget numbers, you're not showing any actual?
That is correct.
Do you have any actuals, like 6 or 7 months? Where do we stand compared to the budget?
We do have actuals that are reviewed by each of the department managers, yes, and we have them very completed through 6 months. We actually give a little more current, but we've reviewed, I think we've completed our reviews with all of the departments for the second quarter, yes.
Where do you feel that we stand compared to the budget at this point? Can you
Repeat the question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the question was, do we have information as to where we are on 2010's budget? Because the numbers that we're showing are all budget. Where are we on the actual so far for 2010? And then I've talked about the department reviews that have taken place on that. The second half of the question was, where are we, how do you think we're coming on that? And with that, what I'll do is I'll give a generic answer that says that we have made reductions this year that have totaled, I believe it was $1.5 million this year, that have already been made that we expect to save out of this year's budget, and that's in the general fund across.
That could be relevant to what we're doing now for next year.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. Yes, sir.
Regarding the issuance of bonds, do we purchase any insurance in case of default?
Our bonds are rated. We are investment grade, but we actually, each transaction we look at to see whether or not bond insurance makes sense. In today's market, the bond insurers, basically, today, the bond insurers that existed 2 to 3 years ago now have a lower credit rating than we do. They were AAA at the time that we were using them, and now they're in the junk bond status. They kind of insured, not kind of, they really did, insure a lot of the subprime mortgages and some of those instruments that you're hearing about, and that hasn't worked out real well for them. There are bond insurers available. Every time we do a bond issue, we check into it. Our reason to insure, keep in mind, we're insuring against our own default. Okay, we do not intend to nor expect to default. What we're insuring is if the buyers of those bonds would pay a lower interest rate to buy the bonds because of that insurance, and the interest that we saved more than paid for the premiums that they charge us to insure them, that is the circumstance that we would insure. Yes, sir. Are we able to renegotiate what? I'm sorry.
The interest rates?
No, we're generally not able to. We can do what's called a refunding bond. They're very structured in what we can do in that because of the federal tax regulations. And for example, some of the bonds that we have outstanding have already been refunded and cannot twice. We do look at that. Actually, our financial advisor constantly is looking for refinance opportunities, but the schedule has to work out to a net savings to make it happen, and it really does get tight. It's not like refinancing a house or a car simply because it goes down. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Joan Child. Could we get, you said that we had numbers for the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And as Charles said, that would be really important to what we're doing today and what our recommendations may include. So is it possible that we could get kind of a balance sheet and a cash flow on the last 6 months to apply to this?
We can give the 6-month data.
Okay.
With that, we would like to have some instruction on it because you often have transactions that take place in one part of the year versus another. And so at that data, you may not have a representation of 6 months in that data. That's not true for all departments, but there are certain expenditures that would be true
But
of.
you could show us with an asterisk or something on the bottom
Right.
page.
We would have to have some type of a presentation of that. Okay? I thank you for no other reason than for staying awake.
Excuse me, Mike Kiak, I got one question real quick. So the detailed sheets that are here break down the, make sure I understand it, the expenditure information that's on page 120, is that right?
That is correct. And what we've tried to do with those is to get them in total to tie out. The real problem is that, like you get into general government, that's a subgrouping of several of those.
Right. So I see the tie-in for 2009, 2008, 2007, but I don't understand 2006. I'm looking at the total 2006. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I'm seeing a $35 million total on the detailed spreadsheet, and I'm seeing a $65 million total on page 120. Have any idea what the difference of the 30 million is?
There is a column there. I think that that's an error on our part. There's a column, if you notice, that next column that says net transfers for that year that shows a minus number of 29 million. Yeah. And I suspect that that is what's bringing that number down. Okay. I think we'll have to check the math and verify that for you, but as I look real quick, that would be my even money bet.
Okay. So if you could get an update and back out to us, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Larry. I actually found that interesting. Maybe I've been doing this too long. Okay, if we could have the, thank you. Okay, what I want to do now is review the expenditures and revenues for the fiscal year 10 budget. At first, we're going to start with the entire budget, and then we're going to get into the general fund. First of all, where does the money come from? You'll see the proposed bonds, for example, the large purple area. Bond funding is 47% of the financing for city center and water and wastewater infrastructure. Plus it has a $60 million what if we get into a new ID, industrial development or something. And so that's a $60 million cushion that the city can spend if we come up with something, which we don't have any idea what it will be, and I doubt that we will this year. So the rest of the chart shows other taxes and surcharges. You'll see the blue area, the larger blue area, $28.3 million. That includes state shared revenues of about $11 million, charges for services of about $7.3 million, franchise fees of about $2.5 million, and other, which is $7.5 million. You'll see also the fund balance and prior year carry forward is 62.1 million, 17%, and you'll see the contingency in the red, the first red, going around clockwise of 16.9 million that we frequently talk about. That's 5%. Sales taxes, 31.9 million, 9%. Property taxes is only 4% of our budget, $14.8 million. And then drop down to the user fees, $22.7 million, 6%. And then grants of $12 million, 3%. Where does the money go? You'll notice the first year capital improvement project, CIP, $74.8 million is pulled out, and that's 20% of the budget. And that 20% includes capital projects totaling $74.8 million and carryover from the prior year of $45.8 million. Other capital one time, $178.4 million, and debt service, $23.2 million, and so forth. The capital improvement program specifically has street projects of $3.9 million, or 5%, technology projects of $825,000, or 1%. Red is water projects of $6.5 million, 9%, wastewater 11.1 million, 15%. Art projects is squeezed in there, it's $99,000, 1%. And then facility projects is 52.2%. Of that 52.2 million, it's important to note that 40 million is in there for the city center project, which is currently being evaluated. Where the money goes, we have the operating budget of $69.2 million, and that's the red that we've pulled out of the pie. The next slide provides more detail for the operating budget.
So John, if city center doesn't go forward, what happens to that money? Is it deferred into future budgets?
It just doesn't get spent. It will show an underage in that in the budget of $40 million for that specific item.
Okay, so going back to where the money comes from, the property taxes. Last time we talked about valuation or changes in valuation. Is the 14.8, I'm assuming it's million, is that still current relative to what you think your current projections are at this point? Go back, let's see, 1, 2, maybe 3, 4 slides. What I'm just trying to understand is, was this the original plan relative to the budget, or does this reflect current thinking?
No, it's the original plan.
Okay, very good, thank you.
John, and then one question I have is that it shows the contingency fund being 16.9 million, but in actually it's more than that.
No,
right?
it is not. It's 16.9 million. At this time, that's what was approved by the city council at the time this year's budget was approved.
But we found extra 7 million.
We didn't find an extra 7 million. I've reviewed that with the committee already. There was $4.1 million additional due to budget savings that we experienced during this past year. But the requirement for the contingency fund is 16.9 million. And I reviewed that for you about what percentage is it of the operating budget? 4 months.
4 months.
4 months of the operating budget. That's 16.9 million. Okay, the fiscal year 9-10 general fund. The operating budget is $50.3 million. The contingency, as I just noted, is $16.9 million. One-time expenses is $11.5 million. Transfers is $8.2 million. And debt and other is $4 million. The general fund operating budget by category shows personal services of $37.9 million, or 75% of the budget. And the contractual services is $10.8 million, or 21% of the budget, and commodities is $1.6 million, or 3% of the budget. Yes, Marvin?
John, does the personal services, does that include payroll plus benefits?
Yes, it does. Yeah. The general fund operating expenditures by department, I want to point out first, you'll see Public Works at $3.4 million, or 7%, that's the orange. And last week you saw a presentation that was $7.4 million. I just wanted to explain the difference. It is $7.4 million. This represents the funds that are purely the general fund, and that is the administration and the facilities, and the $7 million includes administration, facilities, streets, and fleet. Those funds are supported by other donations from the HERF fund, for example, or other funds, so that's why this figure is different from previously. But you'll see information technology is $2.5 million, 5%. Community development is $1.5 million at 3%. Human resources is $2.2 million at 4%. And so on around the pie. The police is $13.6 million, or 27%. And the fire is $10.7 million, or 27%. Those two combined make up almost half of the operating budget.
John, do you have any comparison data on a per capita basis for those kinds of breakdowns with other cities?
I'm sorry, Mike.
What I was wondering is there such a thing as a per capita comparison that I can say number of dollars per household for police support? Okay. Is there such a thing, a comparison report like that exists?
We do play with those figures every now and then, and we can sure check that and get something to you. Okay. There's nothing that we are going to present on that, but we can do something for that.
So if I could ask that as a question, I'm curious to know if,
yes,
if there's any per capita comparison data relative to general fund items with other cities?
Yes, there is, and we will get you some of that.
Okay, thank you.
Let me talk now about, put it into the context of the actuals from fiscal year 2006 to fiscal year 2009. I find this chart just fascinating. This shows you our population from 19,605 people in 2000 up to 63,583 people as of July 1st, 2010 for the projected. That's a whopping, as I mentioned, 219% increase. Now from 2006, 49,813, to 2009, it's 62,554. That population continues to go up. You'll see the red line, however, is the building permits, and you can see in 2006, July 1st of 2006, we hit the peak and then just started the slide down, and it continues down to the bottom. We don't know where it is, but we think we're getting pretty close. But you see that July 1st of 2001, we had 5,650 permits issued. We went up to 7,859 permits in July 1st of 2006, and then down to 3,200 permits in July 1st of 2010 estimated.
So John, on that permit line number there, does one permit equate to one household unit, or does that equate to one building? I mean, like an apartment complex could have 100 units.
No. A permit is a building permit, so if I were to remodel my house, that permit, I would take out a permit, and that would be incorporated also.
So this is not new construction permits?
It's not new construction permits. Last year, for example, I think it was 584 new residential units, and if you take the population times 2.7 people roughly is what population we have in Goodyear, that will show you the population that's added to the base.
Thank you. That's where I was going. Thanks.
Yes,
Gary Gelser, when we issue a building permit, how many permits are out compared to completed houses ready to be sold. So there's some kind of lag of 200, 500. Can you give us a?
We'll have to get that figure for you because I don't recall precisely. I believe it's roughly 284 new single-family homes are under construction right now in the city of Goodyear. Is it somewhere near there?
That's correct.
Oh, okay, thank you. So there's 284 new homes in some point of construction or other.
They don't have a certificate of occupancy.
No, they do not.
Do we have you ever done a comparison of population versus occupancy certificates that we have outstanding? Because that would be much more a reliable number to look at population versus permits. Because if you're doing a remodeling and you get a permit, you're not building a house.
We do that with for our population estimates against the certificates of occupancy. But I can get that specific information for you about certificates of occupancy for your information.
Okay, thank you.
I think what's important to note about this same table, while the decline's going on, we have between 2005 and 2009, I think it's important to note that total industrial space increased 73%, from 3.3 million square feet in 2005 to 5.7 million square feet in 2009. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that, probably I think it's 24%, is vacant, but we have that much more industrial space in the city of Goodyear. Total office space increased 49%, from 870,000 square feet in 2005 to 1.3 million square feet in 2009. And the total retail space increased 115%, 2 million square feet in 2005 and 4.3 million square feet in 2009. This is supposed to be a map that shows you, if you can see the I-10 basically cuts right through there. So this is a map showing you the annexation and the Goodyear's boundaries. The blue line or the black line on the map is about the southern limits of the city prior to the annexation of the area that we commonly call the Montage area, the southern area of Goodyear. The city in 2007 annexed 67 square miles. That extended our city boundary roughly 10 miles further south. So the city limits now go from the top of the picture to the bottom of the picture. The city's municipal planning area, MPA, which is something that we use for the planning, community development purposes, has grown from 111.4 square miles, from 135.2 square miles in 2003 to 246 square miles today. The Sonoran Valley annexation added 95.16 square miles to the MPA. So we have a tremendously large city on the books right now, but as you can see, there's very little development south. You can see the Estrella up here, and then this is Mobile down here. There aren't any wood structure homes in Mobile, I don't think. I think they're all trailer. There's 88 people down there, and that will be important in a second. As we grow, so does the demand for our services. Fire emergency responses increased 170%.
Over what period of time?
I will just tell you in a moment. From 2006 to 2009. What we're trying to do now is in reference to Howard's question specifically, but several of you have asked for, well, why don't we go back to 2006? So we're trying to give you those statistics now. So all of these are from 2006 to 2009. Fire inspections are up 420%. increase, well, that was from 759 to 3,953. An increase in park acreage of 195% from 69 acres to 204 acres. An increase in landscape rights-of-way and medians, 53%. That's from 17 million square feet to 26 million square feet. Irrigation water costs up 76% from $270,000 in 2005-6 to fiscal year 2009, $477,000. Electricity costs are up 339% from $48,750 in 2006 to $214,209. Traffic signals increased 81% from 30 to 67. Total arrests increased 40%. This is from 2004 to 2,804. Total cases were up 56%, and cases should not be confused with calls for service, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And total calls for service increased 110%, or from 42,771 in 2005 to 89,982 in 2009.
Excuse me, all of our numbers that you're giving us here are from 2006, right, to now?
Fiscal year 2006.
Except when it came to arrest, and you said it was from 2004?
No, the increase was from 2004 to 2,804.
Okay.
Total number. Total number of.
Total number,
Yeah,
right.
not
It
year.
was just kind of the way he stated it.
I
okay.
stopped giving the years because they're all the same.
Okay.
I'll get to this in more detail, but somebody also asked what it costs us to open up a new fire station. And it's basically $1.2 million the day the door opens. And we've added several fire stations. This is our calls for service and crime rate, which we've reviewed with you already. But this blue, the blue is the areas initiated by police officers themselves. The yellow is the, excuse me. Well, that's the white bar. It's actually yellow. The white bar represents calls from telephone, and the light blue bar is lobby, and the blue are officer initiated. The red bar are 911 calls. You can see what's happened is that the officer initiated calls has increased tremendously as we've added police officers. You'll see also the crime rate has decreased tremendously as we've added police officers and have them out there proactively and aggressively pursuing all calls. And that's what the Streets Crime Unit that the Chief Brown talked about is really noted for, and the ComStat process that we're using to manage the police department is very noted for. It's working in the police department of Goodyear. We are down from 52.06 Part 1 crimes, as they're known, to 34.88. That's tremendous. And there are very few cities across the country that can stand up to these statistics. In your packets, you have Budget Schedule 3, which is updated. Larry already referenced that. We removed the capital expenditures so you can see easily about the operating expenditures from year to year. Provides actuals for 2009, and then it summarizes expenditures by department. That's Budget Schedule 3. Presentation tonight, we will summarize actuals in public safety, parks and recreation, ballpark, development services, public works, and general government. Public safety key impacts from 2006 and 2009. We have an IGA with the County for Police Service because of the Sonoran annexation, and an IGA with Maricopa, the city of Maricopa, for fire services. That IGA for police services, we have gotten down to $156,280. This was a commitment of, I think it was in excess of $800,000 that we owed because we had police down in Mobile. And so because we took on the Montage annexation as a service responsibility, which it is to the city, we had to A, furnish fire protection, and B, furnish police protection, and C, furnish public works services, basically for roads. All of the roads except the one main state highway running through Mobile are gravel. And so we have to go down there and grade them every 2 months or so, or after a big heavy storm like recently, and we have to go down and repair the roads from washouts and things like that. The fire agreement was that it was costing us about $2 million. $2 million because we hired 14 additional firefighters after the annexation, and we opened up a station down in Mobile, and they were sitting down there having to work with the Mobile community, and then Montage, as you know, went bankrupt, and so they were supposed to be paying us for these services. They didn't. They stopped paying us, and so we were encumbered with about $2.5 million of ongoing commitments that needed to be made, needed to be paid, and no way to do it. So what we did, Chief Brown negotiated with the sheriff, and we contracted with the sheriff to provide 1 man per day equivalent of sheriff's responsibility down there. And that sheriff at least will cover the emergencies and will respond to emergencies. And on the fire, we negotiated Chief Louisi and Chief Gaylord at the time. We negotiated with the city of Maricopa, and we got them to the point where they agreed to operate the fire service for us in that area for $72,867, plus a move of the fire station of $50,000 the first year, which hasn't occurred yet, but those are the expenses that we're obligated to now down there. What we did then was move the 14 firefighters back up into the city of Goodyear and assign them to stations to cut overtime and to provide constant staffing. And I'll review those numbers. The cuts are significant that enabled us to do. The ballpark, the emergency response to the stadium is required, and the police obviously have to do that as well as the fire units. An increase in overtime costs resulted in that, about $30,000. 2 fire stations have been added for service at a cost of $1.2 million each the day we opened the door. Addition of Southwest Advocacy Center, established and supported by Goodyear and other communities. I believe that cost us about $250,000, and that started in 2008. And we established the Street Crimes Unit, which we've reviewed with you already in the police department. And the police department absorbed code enforcement and neighborhood services, and the fire department absorbed the entire building safety operation. Public safety by the numbers. Number of police vehicles. We had 2006, 107. We have in 2009, 130, or an increase of 21.5%. Number of FTEs, we went from 75 police officers in 2006 to 123, or 64% increase in 2009. And the population went from 49,800 in 2006 to 62,500 in 2009, for an increase of 26%. And I hasten to add that's 219% from 2000. Much of what we're doing in 2006, 2007 is still playing catch up. We were growing so significantly that we were constantly out trying to hire police officers, firefighters, parks people, and other people. And then all of this came to a screeching halt. More information about police by the numbers, or police and fire by the numbers. Number of fire stations, we had 4 in 2006. We have 6 in 2009. We actually opened an additional fire station down, as I mentioned, in the Sonoran Valley, but then we've closed that, so that's why it's 4 and 6. or a 50% increase in fire stations. The number of fire apparatus has gone from 13 to 19, which is an increase of 46.2%. The number of FTEs in the fire department has gone from 75 to 112, or 49%. And the number of fires extinguished has increased by 80%, and the number of emergency responses has increased by 172%, from 1,960 to 5,328. This shows you the costs in detail of opening a fire station. This is the fire station that Joan asked about the other day at the mouth of Pebble Creek. When you go into Pebble Creek, it is the smallest of our stations. It's 9,720 square feet and a bay area of 2,900 square feet. But you can see all the costs here. Subtotal operating items is $90,221. And then the fire company, the $1.1 million, for a total of operating costs of basically $1.2 million that I mentioned earlier. This shows you the timeline of public safety developments. It shows you that in 2006, our population down at the bottom was 49,813. And as we went along, we opened up Fire Station 184 on May 1st of 2006. Population went to 55,954 in 2007. And on April 30th of 2007, we opened Fire Station 187. And then we went into 2008 with a population of 59,526. And we had Fire Station 185, that's the Pebble Creek Station, open on May 1st of 2008. And we established the Street Crimes Unit on June 1st of 2008. And ComStat was implemented on May 1st of 2008. And then the building safety merged with the fire department in December 1st of 2008. And then 2009 came along. We had a population of 62,554, and we had the Sonoran Valley IGAs that were negotiated in June 1st of 2009. And May 1st of 2009, we moved code enforcement and neighborhood services over to the police department as one of our many efforts, which I'll review in a moment, of managing through this fiscal crisis.
John,
Yes, sir.
Station 187 is down in the Sonoran Valley, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
That was a temporary building, was it not?
Yes, it was. They were obligated to build us a new fire station.
Is that building still there and it's still usable?
In fact, it is still being used, I believe, by Maricopa until they build a new station over further in towards Maricopa, and then they will vacate that station.
Okay.
And that's the $50,000 for the move.
Okay. But we still have to pay to maintain Station 187 in somewhat of an occupiable
Yes.
position.
Yes.
Okay. And we have public works facilities down there also, is that correct?
We don't really have public works facilities. I think we have a grader parked down there, and a guy drives down, and which takes probably 45 minutes to an hour to get there, because you have to go around to Gila Bend and to come into Mobile, and operates it every 2 months or so.
Okay. Thank you.
Parks and Recreation Stadium, key impacts, again, 2006 and 2009 is the time frame I'm looking at. We have increased maintenance, right-of-way, parks, Bullard Wash, Falcon Park, Foothills Community Park, Goodyear Community Phase 2, Skate Park, Rio Paseo, and Roscoe Park, the dog park. City facilities, we added Water Administration Building, which is some people call it the winery, the new Public Works Center. We have the two new fire stations, Fire Station 184 and 185. We opened the stadium, which is serving two teams this year. So on March 5th, the Cleveland Indians start the season by playing the Cincinnati Reds, the two teams that are here in Goodyear. And that cost us $2.5 million the first year for operations last year. And that will cost us a roughly $2.1 million per year from the general fund for operating. Then that doesn't count the debt service. That will grow to $5.3 million next year. The YMCA is an agreement that the city entered into about 2007, I believe. And that's a cost sharing with the swimming pool. And I believe that we spend about $250,000 a year for that agreement. And then added programs, the youth special interest, adult and senior programs. The YMCA pool has gone up 42% between 2006 and 2009, basically from the price of utilities. We are managing that pool very carefully with the YMCA. It's their pool and they manage it. But because of the agreements we have to help pay for it, Mike Vets works very closely with Ron Seitz in managing that pool, and we're trying to bring those costs down, but they're probably at the base point right now. Parks and Recreation by the numbers, we have number of participants, large special events, has gone from 10,000 to 23,700, an increase of 137%. Again, these are 2006 to 2009. Number of field rentals processed has gone up from 35 to 117, or 234%. Number of adult special interest classes up 136%, from 22 to 52. The number of senior programs have gone from 0 to 30, and the number of youth special interest classes has doubled, 102 to 204. This continues to tell the story of the Parks and Recreation. We have added 5 parks, or 45%, in that time period, 2006 to 2009. We've added 195% in the acres of parks maintained, from 69 to 204. We've added 9 million square feet, 53% of right-of-way that the city is responsible for maintaining. We did this with from increasing the number of FTEs in 2006 from 18 to 42 in 2009, or 133% increase. But it's important to note that of that, 13 are for the ballpark. Then we added 12 more for the ballpark this year, which isn't reflected in here. So the ballpark is a major commitment of the city. Number of recreation participants has gone from 5,200 to 6,000, 15% increase, and the stadium operating cost is $2.531 million.
Don, Gary Gelser. Could you talk about the number of recreation participants? I mean, that number and the percent change looks just dramatically out of whack with every other number that we're seeing. And I'm going to ask you either, if you can't answer it now, we'll take an answer next week.
I cannot answer that right now. We'll have to get back to you and let you know that.
So, Mike, can you define what a recreation participant is? Is that somebody who pays a fee?
It's one person who signs up to take a course or a class or to participate in a recreation activity.
So it doesn't count ball teams or any of the, I mean, if you have a 6-person ball league, you count the one person who signs up for each team, or are you counting the 6 teams times the 15 players per team as a participant?
Mike, every individual.
Okay.
I will get that for you, because I see what you're asking. The 15% seems low compared to the population growth. This shows park and recreation developments on a timeline. 2006, again, our population was 49,813. We added Estrella Park North on April 1st, and then we added the Bullard Wash Phase 1 on February 1st of 2007, as our population got to 55,954. We added Falcon Park on March 1st of 2007, the skate park June 1st of 2007, and Estrella Park South on August 1st of 2007. Then as we entered 2008, our population was at 59,526, and we opened up the new Foothills Community Park March 1st of 2008. And then the Bullard Wash Phase 2 on May 1st of 2009, and the Goodyear Ballpark March 1st of 2009, as our population went over 60,000 to 62,554.
Joan Shield, since I don't know this, please help me out. How do we get more parks? Is this state or city property that we already own that we turn into a park, or are we purchasing new land?
It can be achieved many different ways. Much of it will be donated by a developer. If it isn't donated by a developer, it will be purchased by a developer. We will own it for a few years and then develop it. So like the community park, we own that for a few years and then we developed it. So it may come to us through a different means. Usually it involves the city buying a piece of property. I love this chart. Development services. I mean, I love it because it's caused all of us so much pain, but it really tells the Goodyear story, the way it's happening and what we've been responding to. The dark green line is the revenues that we're receiving from development. You can see that in 2008, we just took a precipitous drop from $12.1 million down to $4.7 million, and then we're at $4.66 million right now. The red line is the revenues that we've received. Wait, no, I'm sorry, the expenditures. The red line is our expenditures. You can see that we peaked out at $8.4 million when we were at the $12 million of permits, and then we had to start going down, and we got down, we're now down to $5.2 million in 2010 budget. And then the number of employees is the light green, and we've gone from 48 employees, FTEs, to 51 employees. We went to 67, 75, 76, and 51. And so we're basically apple to apple there, and that is all the employees related to community development, no matter what department they're in. So that's engineering, community development, fire, public safety, building safety, and everything. So there we have pretty much matched our 2006 levels. Facilities, we have gone from 136,000, again 2006, 947 square feet, to 351,918 square feet, or an increase of 156%. And that's basically on the left of the chart, shows you building 250, which is next door where our library is, the 2 fire stations that we've added, the water administration building that we've added, and then Veneta, this building and the other buildings out here that the city has moved into over the last several years. And the reason I point to these numbers is this is basically the part of Public Works that's general fund. This also shows the entire Public Works function and shows you the growth, the 44% increase, again, from 2006 to 2009, both in lane miles, traffic signals, vehicles maintained, water main miles, and sewer main miles. General government, key impacts, 2006 to 2009 again. We've added many different programs trying to maintain and keep our health insurance rates as low as possible. We've adopted an employee health clinic that is saving us, we believe, significant dollars That costs us, I believe it's $170,000 this year. We have a volunteer program very aggressively. We use volunteers in all the departments, most notably probably in the police department, the fire department, and at City Hall. Retirement health savings program, training programs. We had a very aggressive training program and had a super trainer, Sandra Healy, who we now have eliminated that training program because, as you all know, Sandra has moved over temporarily into the assistant to the mayor's position. Intergovernmental programs, grants administration. We did not have a grants administration in 2006. We added one. Matt Hansen joined our staff and was very successful at obtaining some grants. Matt has left us, and so we redeployed from within. Christine McMurdy has gone into the grants position. We didn't backfill her position. And we have, I think it's about $14 million of grants that we've received this past year. So we're doing pretty well with the ARA funds and have people paying full-time attention to that. Increased litigation. We have been very successful in our litigation, but the litigation has increased both with the ballpark and with the other things that are ongoing. And the reorganization, finance absorbed the staff from the community services, and the city clerk absorbed some of the people also. City manager's office, we absorbed the staff from the mayor and the council, and the community services function that the city used to operate.
John, this is Bill Stipp. These reorganizations did not result in a reduction in force.
Yes, they did.
Did they?
I'll get to that in a moment. This shows a timeline of the key budget impacts, 2006 to 2009. 2007 to 2008 was a busy year. We added the Sonoran Valley annexation. We added the Bonita complexes, except for the courthouse, which came a little later. And we added the Goodyear ballpark. All of that came together at one time. During this time, our population is going like this. It's going up tremendously. If you look at this, it sounds like a really well-managed growth community. But there's the peak of development. And that's what we've been managing through since 2007. And it makes these projects look a little questionable, but quite frankly, I'll tell you, and I have explained to many people, they're great projects, just poor timing. I mean, and nobody can be blamed for that. They just all came due at the same time that we entered one of the most strange economic crises that this country has known, and that's Goodyear has been affected as much as anybody. What does the city staff do to develop the budget? We have the council policy statements or general consensus regarding services. For example, SCU, the Street Crimes Unit, the arts that the city pursues, the tax policy setting the $1.60 maximum tax rate, annexations, the ballpark, the general plan, and development agreements are just some examples of how the council policy impresses upon us the different things that we have to do. Service deficiencies that have been identified through complaints, observations, or citizen survey data. There I highlighted graffiti, bulk trash, recycling, HTE. That HTE is our enterprise system. That Matrix report, some of you have read that. Matrix report recommends we get rid of it a couple years ago. Well, we know that. We have budgeted, or in our long-range budget, $1.5 million to look at that replacement. The replacement of the HTE system will undoubtedly cost us in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million. The demand for service based on identified demographics or neighborhood needs. Comstat is probably the best example of this. And we have a group of VISTA volunteers working within the city right now, working on neighborhood assessments, trying to identify what we need to do. Needs for service identified by special studies or reports. I mentioned Matrix. Matrix, I forget the number, 263? 241 recommendations. This was a study that was commissioned by the mayor and the council, and it was an assessment of everything the city did, and it was independent of the city staff. And the recommendations, we have implemented about 82% of them so far. So it was a very good study. Some of them are not going to be implemented for a long time, such as the study Matrix recommended hiring a third deputy city manager. I have no intention of doing that because we're cutting people right now. It also talked about different setups for the city council staff and the mayor's staff, and so we have pursued that. But we have, as I said, implemented about 82% of the recommendations right now. Equipment deficiencies, usually identified through trends and increased costs. We do a cost-benefit assessment of all of our equipment consistently. Our fleet services does that. Right now, we've been a little naughty because we haven't been aggressively replacing our fleet. For example, police cars, you need to keep going in the rotation cycle. We haven't replaced a police car for, I think, 2 years now. Our costs are going up. Our costs go up geometrically as a car gets older. We have police cars out there with over 100,000 miles on them, and they are always running, and they do not do well once you get over 100,000 miles. So it's something that we have to keep playing with. And one of the things that we've recommended in this year's budget is if we can at all use some of the, one thing we suggested is using to the city council, using part of the $4.1 million to set aside into a vehicle replacement fund that can work as a revolving fund. Known cost factors, we look at these things in developing a budget, such as Social Security costs, contribution rates to employee pension and retirement funds. We look at required costs, usually affected by inflation, such as insurance costs, utility costs, and vehicle maintenance costs. Recommended capital projects based on facility plans or special area land use plans or citizen requests, for example, the library that we are operating right now. Cost of service providers, since we are in the business of service, that's what we do. The cost of employee salaries is the largest expenditure to the city by far. Careful attention is given to step increases, cost of living adjustments, or any other major change in employee salary schedules. We pay careful attention to changes in employee fringe benefits, such as changes affecting vacation policy, overtime, holidays, uniform allowances, health insurance, and sick leave. Because we are in the service business, people are our greatest assets. And we continuously try to tell our employees that, even in these times when we have to lay off some of them. The employees are one big family. And when we had to lay off 27 of the people last year, it hurts. It isn't easy. But we did it in response to the changing conditions that we were seeing, and we had to continue to try to manage. Financial sources are studied, both national, regional, and local. And we make certain assumptions that we use to predict population, housing, retail performance, and industrial performance. Revenue estimates, the staff develops projections each year for each type of revenue the city receives. Projections are based on many different factors and assumptions. Many revenue estimates must be made only on assumptions about general economic conditions and trends. For example, development-related revenue, building permits, construction sales taxes. We used to collect over $2 million a month in construction sales taxes. Last month, we were down at $400,000, and this affects our budget tremendously. And, you know, as Larry said earlier, one of the difficult things is that we don't control is our state legislature. Romina Corquez is our intergovernmental affairs person, our primary lobbyist for the city, on the city staff. She is constantly working with the legislature not to do things that will affect us, whether it's state shared revenues, which bring in, I think it's $7-point-some million, property tax or state shared income tax, state shared sales taxes, different revenues that the state can just take and sweep away. As you know, they've tried to do that several times, and the League of Arizona Cities has very aggressively sued the state, and so far we've prevailed twice, two out of two times, that the courts decided that it was illegal what the state legislature had done, and that we could not have our revenues affected that way. So it's a constant struggle, but Larry's very right. Right now we're sitting in a budget limbo, so to speak. We don't know what the state's going to try to do. We hear rumors every day that the state's going to get to the position where they're going to start paying us in IOUs, which obviously would affect us greatly. That's what California has gone through. So this is something that we have to constantly keep on top of. Yes, sir.
Is there a formula that the state uses to calculate what every city gets?
Yes. Yes, there is. I sure can't answer what that formula is, but I can tell you that with the new census, the 2010 census, it's very important that everybody fill that out, because much of that, when I get a report now from the state that says, here's your, here's the amount that we owe you, and here's the population that's based in the formula, I always notice it's 48,000 people. So that was the population at the turn of the century. And so, yes, it very much affects us.
John Mykiak, can you give me a little more specifics? Like, specifically, I'm looking at the all-fund revenue schedule here, and I notice there's intergovernmental revenue. Is the census numbers going to influence those particular kinds of revenue, specifically in the general fund? I mean, there's lots of things that are general fund listed here. Are there specific ones that are sensitive in the general fund to census data?
Yes, there are. Larry said.
That is generally where the category of the state shared revenues is included that John's referring to.
Okay, so assuming the census data comes in at some point in time, when will you see an impact to the city?
I think it's 2012.
Yeah, fiscal year 2011-12 will be the earliest that impact can come to the city. It takes that long to process it and then rework it through.
Okay, so that would not be a positive impact to next year's budget?
No, it will not.
Okay. Another question related. You started to talk a little bit about it. I'm just looking at data, again, same schedule. There's a couple of items on the schedule that are fairly significant swingers. And what I mean by that is construction sales tax actual for 2009 was about $12.8 million. You budgeted $6.2 million. So I mean that's a pretty big swing. And equivalent general sales tax actual was about 20.9, and you're budgeting about 25.8. So those numbers look like they're pretty. In the spirit of thing, we're talking about $3 million issue here. Those swings are pretty significant. Can you give me any insight in terms of what your thought process was when you were planning the 2010 budget that resulted in swings in the budget of that significant?
Larry?
Yeah, I'll take them in order as you presented. In the construction sales tax, the 2009 number, that fiscal year, that's July 1, 2008 through June 30th of 2009, the first half of that year, we were averaging $1 million to $1.3 million, $1.4 million per month. About February, that number dropped to $500,000 per month. And so when we did that, we've been expecting for some time there would be a drop in the construction sales tax. We didn't know when, but we saw and we quickly adjusted our estimates to reflect that $500,000 a month. We are tracking on that today, but barely. And we're hanging on with our fingernails at that number. That's the 6.2.
So in general terms, what is the source of that revenue? I mean, where's that money coming from when you say construction sales tax? What
Construction activity.
Sorry?
Construction activity.
That would include new housing, it would include commercial. It also includes a proportionate share of the cost of the widening on I-10 that's taking place. A number of different payers pay into that.
So when do they actually pay that fee or that tax? At the time they start a project, or?
Generally for commercial, they're paid as they get their payment.
So as a project matures in its construction, a payment's made?
Correct.
on a
And
schedule.
the exception to that primarily is your single-family residential housing. That's done generally at closing.
Okay, so given that trend of the last couple of years, for fiscal year 2011, do you believe that trend is going to continue, where you're going to see yet another 50% reduction in revenue in that area for 2011?
Right now, my best guess would be probably closer to about a 25% reduction, but we have not, we're really wanting to see about 2 months more data.
Okay, but you are expecting a decrease in 2011.
I am thinking that there may be one. We haven't totally projected that.
Okay.
Now, the general sales tax that you asked
Yeah.
about, that increase was the result of the increase in the tax rate of half a cent. Went from 2 cents to 2.5 cents. And so as a result of that, not everything did, but it was the general level of activity was projected to be about the same as 2009. There was, I believe, about a 2% increase in activity, and the rest of it was an increase due to the sales tax
So
adjustment.
is the general sales tax a function of population, or is that?
It is actual retail sales from the various businesses within Goodyear or transactions done within Goodyear.
Thank you.
Okay. Budgeting in good times. You've asked how I decide where to put the money. When times are good, departments have to fill out a 3-page supplemental to ask us. So when revenues are increasing, we try to spend it to enhance quality of life type things, add nice to haves. So for example, the dog park is a, quote, nice to have. It's not a necessity. That's my opinion, I don't want to offend any dog lovers. Departments submit their base budgets, and the same as the previous year. And then to increase their base budget, they have to submit a supplemental explaining what they're going to, what they want to invest in, how much they need from the city, will it be an ongoing expenditure, that type of argument. And so we then prioritize those based upon, as I said at the beginning, the political goals and the community needs. It's an art, not a science. I mean, that's clear. And I can't give you a scientific explanation, but it is an art that you develop an ability to judge a city council where they will be looking for important things and where they aren't. Ever since I've been in Goodyear, we've been unfortunately in a cutback management mode. And I've been here now 2 budget cycles. There have been no supplementals. The only thing that resembles a supplemental is the $23.1 million that we have on the list right now of major projects that we must undertake, in our opinion, in order to move forward. You've heard us talk about these before. We talked about it in conjunction with the City Center project. Those projects are $6.9 million for the phase 1 of the telecom 911 facility. That will be a new facility. We have decided it will be over by the water treatment plant, by the public works offices. $5.7 million for phase 1 public works corporate yard. That is designing that entire area. The city owns all of that area, or most of that area. There's one other property owner. Around the Public Works Center, we own about 140 acres there. We need to plan where will that building go so that we can place it in the right place at the right time. And so that's why we have that moved up into the priorities as a must-do. Public safety radios of $9 million. You know, our police officers cannot talk to other cities. It's just remarkable. Our police officers cannot talk to other fire departments. It's remarkable. The fire department is on a very good system. They're on a Phoenix-managed system. We are paying into it as one of, I think there's 34 cities that are a part of that. They are years ahead of us on things that we need to do in the police department. What this will do is will allow us to replace radios and start a process to go to a regional system that will allow officers to talk to each other.
John, Mike, do you happen to know whether or not the other cities could talk to each other? I mean, even if we bought the radios, would the other cities have the capability to talk to each other?
As all the other cities like us are under contractual obligation to make these conversions, so we will all be in that position eventually.
Right now, they don't currently have it either. Have we ever worked collaboratively with the other cities to go after grant money to solve it as a city area solution as opposed to just a Goodyear solution?
Absolutely. I mean, we do that every day, and we're doing that right now. So
specifically for the radios?
Yes, we are. On the fire side, for example, you have a consortium that they meet with, and on the police side, we have a consortium now that we're meeting with to try to get that implemented.
Thank you.
And then $1.5 million, this is what I referred to earlier as the phase one, the business analysis of replacing the HTE, which is our enterprise system. And I mentioned that this is just for the business analysis. We will have to implement that replacement, which will probably be in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million. Now, those figures aren't what will have to be paid for out of the city's funds necessarily. Many of these will be offset by impact fees that people have had to pay to us, and we have sitting in the bank in order to develop some of these items. I don't know what the breakdown is between each of these, but if you want that, we can get that for you. How much is impact fees? How much is going to be general governmental funds or things like that? What we do during cutback management, we review organizational missions. We review citizen survey satisfaction levels, and we'll hear about that, I think it's next week or the week after. We look at productivity improvements. We reduce service levels least affecting the public. We expand revenues, fees for service, taxes, things like that. We defer capital improvement projects. We delay preventative maintenance, as I mentioned. That's a catch-22 because your costs may go up, but you have to keep that balance in play. You extend cycles or eliminate replacement programs. You consolidate organizational units wherever possible. You institute hiring freezes, layoffs and furloughs, alternative delivery systems. For example, trash collection. Sonoran Valley, I have already told you what we did with the police and the fire in response to that tragic incident. Litchfield Park, we're working with them right now to see if we can provide fire service to them. They, as you may or may not know, are served by Rural Metro Fire District, and they are trying to get a property tax right now, and they want to very much get into the city's fire service and get rid of Rural Metro. So we're working with them to see if we can do that service out of our fire station 173, which is up by the community park, because we don't believe that we would have to even expand. We could just start serving them, and they could pay us for that service. So we're looking at that as a real possibility. Right-sizing departments. We're constantly looking at that, and have citizen input meetings to help prioritize any decreases in service levels that will be recognized. And that's something like you're participating in right now. We try very surgically to address our cuts. I don't like across the boards. They never work well. I mean, if you're doing across the board, everyone hurts equally, true, but the people that don't hurt equally are the citizens who get the services. So we've tried very surgically to go in and cut expenses where we believe they will have the least impact on the residents. Okay, here's what we've done since '07 and '08. We've eliminated 2 director positions. And those are, I don't know, 140,000 each savings. We've combined water and public works for efficiencies. They were together at one time. They were pulled apart. We have put them back together. And I just named Charles McDowell, who presented to you last week, as the new Public Works Director. I removed his interim title from him. So he is our new Public Works Director, just as I removed David Ramirez's interim title from City Engineer, Director of City Engineering. He is now our Director of City Engineering. So both of those men have done a fantastic job for the city, and so I felt that Mark Gaylord was the acting in that particular case, and so we were able to take a city engineer that we've had for years and put him into that slot, and we took Charles McDowell, who has been interim, I think, since July of last year, and made him the permanent Public Works Director. Redeployment of fire staff from Sonoran Valley saved $603,353. And that was both in a reduction of overtime, $369,795, and a constant staffing, which is $233,558, which allows us not to have to call back men and women as often as we did otherwise. We've frozen 63 positions and laid off an additional 27 or something like that, beginning in '08 and '09. That has resulted in tremendous millions of dollars of savings to the city, which is an ongoing type expense. But that means that we have employees who are, quite frankly, working their tails off in order to get things done. We're back to, as you saw, almost to 2006 levels, while we have 26,000 additional residents. It's difficult, but the employees, by working together, have been able to do that. We've stopped merit increases and COLA adjustments in fiscal year '08 and '09 before any other city did. And those have been continued in fiscal year 9 and 10 and fiscal year 10 and 11. We've also taken benefits away from employees. Tuition reimbursement, which paid $4,000 annually per employee. We have had about 134 people participating in that program. Some people were right in the middle of their career development and their degree program. So that hurt dramatically. Internal training eliminated $131,000. Rewards and recognition eliminated $30,000. Uniform allowance, the fire department came to us and said, we will cut our uniform allowance in half. And that was fantastic. They said that. Other departments we haven't addressed with that. But the fire department came forward and cut theirs in half. And so they now are at $1,000 and some. Police department signing bonus. We had a signing bonus of $2,000 for people who brought somebody to the city to be a police officer. We haven't hired a bunch of police officers recently, so we cut that also. Pay hours worked on holidays has saved us $112,750. And that's in the fire department and the other departments throughout the city. We have done that. That's it. Be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
Scott Mikes, I was curious, the thing that stood out to me with when you're talking about possible revenue with Litchfield, what does that mean in dollars as far as covering the fire services and contract? I mean, that's something that's legitimate to actually think that might happen sooner than later, or? what sort of money or revenue would that bring in? Because you had mentioned that there would pretty much be no expansion, which doesn't sound like much additional cost.
I can't answer that truthfully because we're still in negotiations. It will probably be in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $450,000 with no added costs to the city. And that's what we're looking at right now, and we're trying to work that out between Darrell Crossman, the city manager of Litchfield Park, the mayor and the council. And this is, quite frankly, it's a sensitive subject. They have a fire service, Rural Metro. Rural Metro, I don't know if you're familiar with it. If you live in Litchfield Park, you can subscribe to Rural Metro from your personal bank account. And if you get a fire, they take care of you. If you don't, if you have a fire, they take care of you. If you don't subscribe, they will bill you their actual costs, which would be significant. So that's how Litchfield Park furnishes their fire service. They don't have a paid fire service. And what we're looking at is, okay, our men approached us and said, look, we can serve this out of the fire station next to the community park. It's not much different distance from how we have our fire stations around the city. So that's why we can do it, A, without increased costs, and B, how they can do it from their standpoint.
Have we ended up servicing that area because of our location already, though?
Yeah.
If Rural Metro is not available,
Yes.
have we gone over any of this?
As Paul Louisi talked to you, we have this universal agreement in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Rural Metro is not a part of it, but we have it. And so we are frequently the first one in to Litchfield Park. If somebody calls for help, we go. We basically already serve them.
And Rural Metro doesn't have to, if they're paying contractual services to Rural Metro, Rural Metro doesn't have to necessarily reimburse Goodyear for making a call for them.
Not that I know of. Paul? They do? Okay. Okay, thank you. Gary?
Several years ago, we had a city policy where public safety would not go into county islands, and that was directed by council. Has that policy been changed, or where do we stand on that?
Paul?
That policy has not changed. We will only respond when we're called.
When called by the...
By Rural Metro.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Barry Hamp. A while ago, I have two things. One's a question. A while ago, you talked about the money we need to spend in the coming year for a lot of Phase 1 projects. If we go into Phase 1 projects, are we obligated to Phase 2 or 3 or whatever happens, or is it something that you don't have to plan for the year after next?
We don't have to plan for the year after next, and we won't in many of these cases, but we hopefully won't end up with plans that are put on the shelves. We hope they will lead us in our planning to some time when we can afford it to implement the plans.
Thank you. And my second piece was a comment. This is huge. You and your staff did a great job of putting these things together. I don't pretend to understand it yet, but it's a great job putting all this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
A second.
Larry. Thank you. Yes.
This has really, it's not so much a budget question as it is a management question. Did you implement the balanced scorecard type of management for the fire department?
No, we do not use the balanced scorecard.
Paul talked about it for his department when he was representing the police department. And I hear two changes that apparently they have implemented. They voluntarily said that they would reduce their uniform cost of $92,000. Is that right?
Yes.
Which probably came under that balanced scorecard style.
No, it was not.
Well, I had never heard of that balanced scorecard style of management in my life, but I have done the last week intense research on the internet, and I applaud you. That is a very good style of management, and that probably is why your fire department is running a little lean and mean, and really that is great. And I just wondered if that was your implementation, or have you considered that with the police department?
No, we have not. The police are doing a fantastic job with ComStat, which is a statistically based method of management, and that is going very well. What we use in the city manager's office, and you look, I urge you to look at the budget, because we have performance indices, and those are the performance indices that we manage with. We have goals and objectives with each department director for things that they have to meet. In a way, it's like a balanced scorecard. We don't call it that, though. Larry.
Several years ago, right after the $1.60 limit kicked in, for political reasons, let's say, the city was not levying its legal limit for primary property tax. And a couple of years later, their friend at the state legislature changed the base for the city's legal limit. Could you tell me how much more our primary property tax levy would be FY 910 if we would have levied the maximum all along instead of losing?
Okay, Larry?
Yeah, our most recent estimate of that calculation would be approximately 1.5 million
That's just this year.
per year, yeah.
So I just bring that up because personally, it's silliness to me, this $1.60 thing. So, but that was one thing. It cost the city out of its operating budget every year at least $1.5 million, and it will continue to do so because we will never get it back.
Thank you. Anything else?
John, have you guys taken a look at furloughs for the upcoming year?
We are.
Popular question with everybody.
We constantly have that on our radar. We don't believe in furloughs because the workload is there. We don't believe in salary cuts because we need our employees that we have left to be operating at full steam and full morale. And the costs would be insignificant to me. 1%, for example, would save $351,000 in a salary cut. So to get the $3 million that we talk about every now and then, to get that, you'd have to have 9% cut or 10% cut. In my opinion, as city manager, that's unrealistic. So,
With respect to furloughs, have you guys studied that at all?
we are studying it, yes.
Is that something that you guys would make available to the committee, if the committee would want to see that type of data?
I don't see why not, sure. Thank you. Dick?
Wait, John,
Oh, I'm sorry, Gary.
a follow-up. Could you elaborate on furloughs and how you envision them to be utilized? I mean, is a furlough like you're taking a month off without pay? Or is a furlough you're taking a day off every 14 days? Or,
Or any
hiring
combination
somebody
thereof.
and then they can come back when times are good and we'll hire them back again?
It's all those things or any combination thereof. Most cities look at it in terms of probably a maximum of 10 days, 10 furlough days, that they can pick and choose within a year. And so you try to take one a month or something like that.
So these are these might be at the employee's discretion?
They might be, yes.
And they would just be an unpaid day that they don't come to work and the city doesn't pay them?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
John, I'm not sure that if this question is specifically for you or not, so just hang in there while I ask the question of the group, I guess. Joan, you had asked about getting or somebody did, about the current the 6 months worth of current financials, and Larry had kind of said, hey, those all come with an asterisk because of things that are going to come due later in the year that don't necessarily show up. And I guess I was wondering, is there a different form that we can get that information that doesn't contain an asterisk in it that might get to what we're trying to get out of that? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I think the information that comes with an asterisk is going to be, it's not going to be accurate. We're going to make bad decisions off of current, quote-unquote, current data. And I'm wondering if there's not a better way for us to get some current numbers. For example, you mentioned that this year already you have made $1.5 million worth of cuts. If we could even just get a list of what that $1.5 million worth of cuts would be in all of this prepared budget information, that might in and of itself answer the question. So I'm going to kind of throw that out there. And
We could do that, Bill, certainly. Yes.
Question relating to that. We could have fiscal year '09, month-to-month actual for the entire year. We might be able to see where the bumps would be.
We can sure check on that. Al?
Are pay freezes in the formula of an idea for?
They have been suggested. Our own.
Are given, the staff or our professionals are given raises each year, correct?
No, as I mentioned, we have not had a raise in 2.5 years now.
So it is frozen then?
Oh, yeah, it's frozen. Yes, I'm sorry. There have been no increases at all for 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
John, Mike, yeah, have you put a notional budget together yet for 2001?
We're working on a tentative budget, yes, but it's not completed. Yes?
I had a question on populations. I brought it earlier up. I read a projection that if the metropolitan area of Phoenix loses a 1% drop in population, it can cost us $1.5 billion in sales. I'm just curious, because the census is it's happening right now. Within a year, what if that figure is low for our population? Does that reflect sales tax, all kinds of revenue generating potentials for cities and municipalities?
It will, because, I mean, ours will go up no matter what, but the question is how much will it go up? Because we're working off a base of 48,000 right now. So we'll go up if we're only 60.
You're working on the base of 48,000?
Yeah.
Because that's what I had come up with.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned it to you.
2005 number.
Yeah.
That's a 2005 number that MAG has had a special census done so they could reevaluate because of the actual growth between 2000 and 2005. The city's actual population in 2000, the last actual census, is 18,927 people or something like that. That's the official number, and then it was adjusted for 2005.
That takes into account all these foreclosures of people leaving because they're moving, they're transient.
2005 number, it was based on a survey of, I think, 1 in 6 households that the county did through the entire region, and every city was given a new adjusted base population, which impacts the shared revenues that you get from the state, because you get X dollars per person that is a citizen of Goodyear. So John's number of 48,000 and change, which is the 2005 number, that's the number that we get our shared revenues every year from, no matter what our population is. So even though our population has grown based on building permits and occupancy and shrinkage, we're still only getting paid. We have 62,000 people or change here, and we're providing services for 62,000. We're getting paid by the state for 48,000 of those people.
So I'm curious, was there an estimated projection? What will happen once the census numbers hit? I mean, what are you expecting to see in the way of a revenue increase in
I don't know if that's possible even.
2012?
Is it?
We've never done that type of an estimate because the variables, I really look at our growth rate compared to what the estimate for the city of Phoenix would be, and that variable by itself is pretty complex. But they're, being the largest city, they're the biggest driver.
I can't, it's not a linear relationship that my population went up by 25%.
No, it is not. It's a total pool divided by the population in all the cities.
You would only get more money if our population went up at a rate faster or higher or greater than the rest of the population.
Also, if your population could go up 50%, but if the pot of money shrank 60%, you don't necessarily get any more money either. So Yeah, like Larry said, it's pretty difficult to get.
Al's next, I think.
Supposedly what I'm hearing is that in population, the new census, they're going to take into account illegals and snowbirds. So that
I've been told that they are going to count snowbirds. I don't know this for a fact. I don't know how we're going to do
how is
that
it
yet.
going to affect us? Yeah.
The illegals, I have not followed that closely.
They
I have, yeah.
They
want to count them.
I've checked it.
And are they going to count them?
I checked it. They say they're going to count them, but it doesn't make sense as to how it's actually pan out in terms of the bottom line.
Okay.
They only count people on April 1st. And when you fill out a census card, you put a primary resident. So if you're a snowbird, say you come from Minnesota and you live here 6 months, and you live there 6 months, and you say your primary residence on April 1st is in Minnesota, Minnesota gets your population, Arizona gets to pay for you for 6 months of services. I have a question. Don't we get a preliminary number within like 9 months of the census? Don't they come out with?
I think so, yes.
So we'll have some type of a number that we can at least work on a budget from.
Yes, we will.
And as Larry said, if they don't shrink the pool,
If they have a pool left.
well,
No water in
it's Arizona. They
Margaret?
have sand.
John, is it possible to defer or suspend retirement contributions until better times?
No, it is not. ASRS, Arizona State Retirement System, will not allow that, or statutorily will not allow it, and the Fire and Police Service will not, statutorily cannot do that either. Thank you. Good. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So I'm going to run through what I hear are some of the specific questions, and you add if I'm missing something. The midterm stats of revenue and expenditure. Take a look at that midterm data in some fashion. It could be useful to you, recognizing that there's all sorts of variations on the flow of revenues and expenses throughout the year that are not completely predictable. So that kind of information. Clarify the question you brought up about the 06 data on that one particular graphic. Per capita comparison from city to city, cost of service per citizen, or some other
Is there some metric,
some metric across the regional community. And then I think the question that I don't know who brought it up, but I make sure I understand this. I think it was homes under construction, predominantly homes with a C of O still vacant. And also it was suggested we might bring in the number of homes under construction just to have some additional data, since they will presumably get the C of O and fall into that same situation. Disproportionate relationship of parks involvement, percentage increase to population growth, 0609. What makes up the formula for the state shared revenues? A little more specific detail. Well, it's basically population, but there may be other factors, and we can get that and share that information. The database, you mentioned furloughs specifically, but I think what we really need probably is base data that allow you to plug in any of those variations and get a sense of what the cost would be. So not just related to furloughs, but if you have the database, you can work that any way you choose. And I think that covers the big ones. May I also just mention, because I don't think it was mentioned in the presentation, the 30% cost of benefits also includes vacation and sick leave, which is probably the largest chunk of that. Yes, sir.
I specifically am looking for the budget compared to actual for each month this year that we have, and also for the previous year, so we can see, as I said, where the jumps are.
Excellent. Okay. Month by month, 9, 10, and then where we are.
So far this fiscal year.
Okay. Anything else, folks, that we've missed there? It's 20 minutes to 9. Do you want to, let me just mention a couple of quick things. One is we'll add we'll bring that data to you, but I think perhaps you're going to want a few minutes at least to mention what some of those asterisks are, at least in a gross sense. So we'll add that to the next meeting, provided we can put that together. Well, we'll add it as soon as we possibly can, no later, 2 weeks, okay.
I would prefer some sort of a recap at some point in time as opposed to just answering the question in post.
Oh, but you want something in some data also.
I'd like to be able to have some discussion when the
Right.
data comes back, that if there's questions, that we can get through the information quickly, ask questions about it, and put it to bed. That's why I'd like the opportunity to bring it back for discussion.
Okay, very good. So if it happens earlier, fine, we'll shoot for 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
For that, or tomorrow for that. Good. Anything else, folks, for the good of the order? Well, thank you very much. I think there was a tremendous amount of work, and I'm glad you appreciate it. And I found it actually interesting, John, like you did, to follow and thorough and complete. Thank you, folks. We'll see you next Wednesday.